everyone here okay? Thanks everybody for sticking around till the end here. I'm going to talk about futures of investigative journalism because nobody can decide on what it's really going to be. So as Larry was saying, it's a very exciting time. I have a couple of things up on the front here. We know that it involves data, nonprofits, networks, and global collaboration. There's a piece of history over to the side. It's really old. It's 1985. There's a show called Max Headroom based on a great investigative reporter, fictional Edison Carter. The whole idea of that show was 20 minutes into the future. The unfortunate part was it's actually 25 years into the future because we're all a little slow. The other diagram here has to do with social networking, which is something that has really come along. And one of the important things to do in investigative journalism now is to do social network analysis. So what has the past been? Competition, isolation. Broadcast magazines, commercial radio, large print projects, that's been investigative reporting. Not really interconnected, very competitive, sometimes repetitive because of the competition. In the past, what have we had in investigative reporting structures? We've had beat and topic reporters. We've had project teams that work on stories forever and ever. We've had the lone wolf. Seymour Hersh would be a great example of the lone wolf. Past methods. Undercover and surveillance, boxes and boxes of documents, interviews and cultivation of deep sources. And then it all begins to change. The change actually started happening in the late 80s and the early 90s. We were slow to recognize it within the industry. At some newspapers, we discovered the web in the 21st century after it had been around for almost 10 years. But we did change. We started to change. Where did the change start? Personal computers and the Mac in the mid-80s. Suddenly, a reporter could have access to lots of information. There was an internet before the web. Suddenly, they could start looking at databases by themselves without having to go to large mainframes. And then they had access to databases. Databases in columns and rows of information ranging from 10,000 records to now 5 million, 10 million records. Then the internet, the web came along in 1993, Mosaic started here, and suddenly we had access to the web if our newsrooms allowed us to have access to the web. Sometimes we had to go home to get it because they were afraid of hackers or us browsing or playing games. And then we all of a sudden started to have all sorts of digital tools. At the same time, advertising resources are plummeting. I think advertising has gone down in the last 5 years for newspapers by 47%. The editorial staffs have been cut by $1.6 billion at newspapers over the last few years. And so journalists were gone. Long-term investigative work turned into more of short-term watchdog work, still valuable, but depending on less resources, less time. What's the hope and what's the optimism? Suddenly with all these changes, people could be more nimble as a journalist. We started creating networks wherever we were, long before people started talking about networks. There was the Global Investigative Journalism Network. It started in the year 2000. It's now 40, 50 nonprofit newsrooms around the world. Investigative News Network started 2 years ago, has gone from 20 to more than 60 nonprofit investigative newsrooms or newsrooms that do investigations. You have networks for regions of continents, the Forum for African Investigative Reporters, hundreds of reporters throughout not South Africa, but Southern Africa joining together. Behind this are foundations like the Knight Foundation, Open Society, Ethics and Excellence, whole set of foundations, McCormick Foundation, all pouring money into this. Total money poured into a lot of these projects is around $180 million into nonprofits. A drop in the bucket when compared to $1.6 billion, but it's money being aimed at the kind of enterprise reporting we've talked about earlier and the kind of investigative reporting we have. So here's the Global Investigative Network. We couldn't fit the whole world on this little map, but it moves around when you get on the site. You can see that every continent there's going to be someone. That turns into global investigations. You now work on a major investigation. You may be working with 7, 8, 9, 10 organizations, both mainstream media and new nonprofits. You had something like Dangers in the Dust that showed how North America was exporting asbestos to all sorts of developing countries, involving 20, 30 reporters and lots of news organizations. What's the new common ground between everybody now? Data-driven journalism. You can start off a story with a source, or you can start it off with a major database and analysis of that database. What's another common ground? Journalists and programmers are getting together. What's another common ground? Much more communication between investigative reporters and the public in things like crowdsourcing. Hacks and Hackers, an organization that's been created in the last year or two. It brings journalists, hacks, together with hackers, programmers, to develop applications and programs that allow us to analyze and look at data, text, whatever is out there, and possibly visualize it in significant ways. We've got journalists, developers getting together on accountability projects. The Sunlight Foundation is looking at making government transparent and accountable. Exactly what investigative reporters have always wanted to do, and they're joining up with them. What we find now is we need to think, it's the media, it's the medium, it's not the industry. We're not talking print or broadcast now in investigative journalism. We're just talking about what works for the story. It could be text, it could be audio, it could be video, and it's all contained on a smartphone. You can see multimedia springing out of some of the new nonprofits. The Center for Investigative Reporting and Special Project California Watch looks at earthquakes and the dangers to schools that aren't really built to withstand earthquakes in California. You've got video, you've got audio, photos, you've got data analysis, you've got well-written stories, and you even have an iPhone app called My Fault. Okay? The future, I think networks will continue. The New York Times itself is working with one of the great new nonprofits, ProPublica. You have sub-networks of the networks. It isn't that everyone has to work all together at the same time. There may be a few here and a few there. And you'll still have mavericks, like Seymour Hersh, people that look like a modern I.F. Stone, self-publishers, one-person shows that do incredible work because they can do data analysis and they can read. So it could be one, it could be several, it could be many. For-profit, non-profit, no profit. We're still seeing investigative reporting, great stuff done out of some of the mainstream newspapers and media that's managed to stay alive and stay vibrant. We've got the rise of the nonprofits, and we've got volunteers. More people offering their time because they're worried the investigative reporting is disappearing. It might be a programmer, it might be an expert, but much more working together. What's happened in investigative reporting? We used to think of investigative reporting as a long time of work, and then suddenly there is the epiphany, the great project that comes out, and all of a sudden everybody reacts and everyone remembers it for about a week, and then we move on to the next grand, expensive project. That can still happen all at once. But what we're finding is the investigations now can come together, especially networks, especially because they're global, and be asynchronous. One part of a story may appear at 3 a.m. our time, another part at 9 p.m. It could be a week, it could be a month before another part of it comes together. Parts come at different times at different locations. And it turns out that projects now, investigative work, is eternal. It lives and lives on the web. It can be added and subtracted to forever. And it can be revived and reposted. What was important maybe 3 months ago didn't seem very important for a while. Suddenly something happens, a plane crashes, and the story about transportation safety becomes alive again. Visualization, that's where we're all moving to. There's way too much information, way too much text, audio, all coming at us. We've got to filter it. We've got to take complex problems, and we've got to make them more understandable. We can visualize our data mining now. We can put charts and maps up there. We can make visualizations of words, of entities of words, of emotions. And we can do such things as social network analysis. Who's connected to whom? Where is the influence? Where is the power? How's a terrorist cell work? All these things are possible. And we don't have to look for all the resources in wherever we're working. They're the clouds. By the way, this is a cloud on Seymour Hersh. Okay. Social network analysis is happening everywhere. It's been around since 1940. Journalists started taking it up in about the year 2000. This is looking at a network of charities and the funneling of money out in Arizona. This kind of visualization can study and finally understand how a scam works. And finally, we're still looking to 20 minutes in the future, and we're not that far away from Edison Carter way back in the mid-1980s. Edison Carter was the original mojo, mobile journalist, carrying a camera, reporting back to you, having a link back to the newsroom, somebody feeding him data, telling him what was coming at him, what a building diagram was, how he could get somewhere, GPS, everything. So that's where we want to stay. We want to be the digital journalist. What we don't want to end up being, however, is what he turned into, which was the digitized journalist, when he ran into a little piece of wood and ended up living in a computer the rest of his life. So thank you very much.